Who invented mirrors? The strange history of humanity's obsession with seeing ourselves. What if I told you that the first mirror in human history wasn't made of glass? It wasn't made by a scientist. It wasn't invented in a laboratory. And it certainly wasn't something you could hang on your bathroom wall. The first mirrors were made from something much simpler, water. Thousands of years ago, before humans could polish metal or manufacture glass, people discovered something almost magical. If you looked into a perfectly still pool of water, you could see yourself. Your face. Your eyes. Your reflection. Imagine experiencing that for the first time. You look into a dark pool, and suddenly, another person appears. They move when you move. They stare when you stare. But they never speak. To ancient humans, this must have seemed almost supernatural. And perhaps that's why mirrors became connected with magic, spirits, gods, and even the soul. But eventually, humans wanted something better than water. They wanted to carry their reflection with them. And that's when one of the strangest inventions in human history began. More than 8,000 years ago, people in what is now Turkey were already making objects that may have functioned as some of the world's earliest mirrors. They weren't made from glass. They were made from polished volcanic glass called obsidian. Obsidian can naturally have an incredibly smooth, dark surface. When ancient people polished it carefully, it became reflective. And suddenly, a human being could look at their own face without finding a lake or river. These early mirrors were small, dark, and nowhere near as bright as the mirrors we use today. But they changed something fundamental. For the first time, humans could carry their own reflection. And people clearly cared about what they saw. Archaeologists have discovered ancient obsidian mirrors buried with the dead, suggesting that these objects may have had cultural or symbolic importance. But obsidian wasn't the only material humans experimented with. Across the ancient world, people discovered that certain metals could also reflect light. And one civilization would take this idea much further. Ancient Egypt. Around the 3000s BC, Egyptians were making mirrors from highly polished copper. These mirrors weren't just practical objects. They were beautiful. Some were decorated with elaborate handles shaped like flowers, animals, or religious symbols. And they were often associated with beauty, wealth, and status. But there was something fascinating about Egyptian mirrors. They weren't perfectly clear. Their reflections were distorted, dark, almost ghost-like. And yet people still wanted them. Because seeing your own face was becoming more than a curiosity. It was becoming part of human identity. But the ancient Egyptians weren't the only ones obsessed with reflections. Thousands of kilometers away, another civilization was developing an even more sophisticated mirror. And this time, the mirror would become so valuable that people would treat it almost like treasure. As civilizations became more advanced, mirrors began appearing in different forms across the ancient world. The Greeks experimented with polished bronze. The Romans used silver, bronze, and other metals. But some of the most beautiful ancient mirrors came from China. Chinese craftsmen became famous for producing highly polished bronze mirrors, some of which were decorated with dragons, animals, plants, and mysterious symbols. These mirrors were more than simple household objects. They could represent wealth, power, beauty, and even protection. Some were buried with important people. Others were given as gifts. And some were believed to possess supernatural properties. But here's where the story becomes truly strange. Certain ancient Chinese bronze mirrors are known today as magic mirrors. When light shines onto the reflective surface at the right angle, a hidden pattern can sometimes appear on the wall behind the mirror. The image seems to pass through the solid metal. How? Ancient craftsmen somehow created incredibly subtle variations in the thickness and curvature of the bronze surface. To people who didn't understand the physics, it could look like magic. A mirror that could reveal an invisible image. A mirror that seemed to contain a secret. But mirrors weren't only used for beauty or entertainment. They were also becoming symbols of power. In ancient cultures, rulers and religious leaders were often surrounded by reflective objects. Why? Because reflections seemed to represent something deeper. A mirror showed you exactly what you looked like, but it also raised an unsettling question. What is the person looking back at you? Is it really you? Or is it only an image? This strange connection between mirrors and identity would continue for thousands of years. And eventually, Europe would take mirror making in an entirely new direction. By the Middle Ages, glassmaking was becoming more sophisticated. But there was a problem. A normal piece of glass isn't a very good mirror. It allows most light to pass straight through. To turn glass into a mirror, you need something behind it that reflects the light back toward your eyes. For centuries, craftsmen experimented with different materials. Then, in Renaissance Europe, something remarkable happened. Glassmakers in Venice developed techniques for creating much clearer mirrors using thin sheets of glass backed with reflective metal. Suddenly, the reflection became sharper, brighter, more realistic. And that changed everything. Mirrors were no longer just strange objects from the ancient world. They were becoming luxury products. And in Europe, luxury came with a price. A very high one. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Venetian mirrors became some of the most expensive objects in Europe. The craftsmen who knew how to make them guarded their techniques fiercely. The Venetian government was so protective of the industry that mirror makers were forbidden from sharing their secrets with foreign competitors. Some craftsmen who left Venice could face severe punishment. Why? Because mirrors were worth a fortune. A beautiful Venetian mirror could cost more than an entire house. Only kings, aristocrats, and extremely wealthy families could afford them. And the richer you became, the more mirrors you could display. One of the greatest symbols of this obsession appeared at the Palace of Versailles in France. The famous Hall of Mirrors was filled with enormous mirrors that reflected chandeliers, gardens, and hundreds of candles. It wasn't just decoration. It was a message. Look around. Look at all this wealth. Look at all this power. Look at yourself. Surrounded by luxury, the mirror had become a symbol of status. But there was another transformation happening. Mirror making was slowly becoming industrial. As manufacturing techniques improved, mirrors became cheaper and more accessible. Instead of being objects owned only by kings, they began appearing in ordinary homes. Then came the 19th century. New industrial methods allowed manufacturers to coat the back of glass with thin layers of silver, creating brighter and more reliable mirrors. For the first time, mass-produced mirrors became possible. And something fascinating happened. The mirror stopped being a luxury and became part of everyday life. People could check their appearance before leaving the house. They could style their hair, adjust their clothes, apply makeup, and perhaps most importantly, they could constantly see themselves. Today, that sounds completely normal. But imagine how strange it would have been for someone born before mirrors became common. You could live your entire life without ever seeing your own face clearly. You might know what you looked like from other people's descriptions. You might see a reflection in water, but you wouldn't have a permanent image of yourself. Modern mirrors completely changed that. And they may have changed something else too. The way humans think about themselves. Because once mirrors became cheap, people didn't just use them to see their faces. They began comparing themselves, judging themselves, improving themselves, and sometimes obsessing over themselves. A simple reflective surface had become a psychological tool. But there's one final twist in the story. Because the mirror we use today isn't actually showing us the present. When you look into a mirror, you probably think you're seeing yourself exactly as you are. But you're not. You're seeing yourself, a fraction of a second in the past. Light has to travel from your face to the mirror, then bounce back into your eyes. The distance is tiny. The delay is almost impossible to notice. But technically, the person you see in the mirror has already existed for a moment. And there's something even stranger. A mirror doesn't actually reverse left and right. It reverses front and back. Your right hand remains your right hand. But because you're facing your reflection, it appears as though your image is facing you. This is one of the reasons mirrors have fascinated humans for thousands of years. They don't simply show us the world. They challenge our understanding of reality. From the first humans staring into a pool of water, to obsidian mirrors in ancient Anatolia, to polished copper in Egypt, to bronze magic mirrors in China, to the priceless mirrors of Venice, and finally, to the cheap mirror hanging in your bathroom, the technology changed dramatically. But our fascination never disappeared. So, who invented mirrors? The honest answer is, no single person did. The first mirror may have been nothing more than a human being looking into still water and realizing, I can see myself. After that, thousands of generations improved the idea. They polished stone. They polished metal. They shaped glass. They added reflective coatings. And eventually, they created the modern mirror. What began as a simple observation in a pool of water became one of the most important objects in human culture. Mirrors helped people understand beauty. They influenced fashion. They transformed architecture. They became symbols of wealth, vanity, magic, and identity. And today, we barely think about them. We walk past mirrors dozens of times a day. We glance at ourselves without even stopping. But perhaps that's what makes the story so fascinating. The mirror is one of humanity's oldest technologies, and yet, every time you look into one, you're experiencing the same basic miracle that amazed someone thousands of years ago. A face appears where no person is standing. It copies your every movement. It looks exactly like you, but it isn't you. And perhaps that's why, after thousands of years, we still can't stop looking.